Hey guys, Jeff and Lori Poole here with the Shoot Space. In our article today, we talked about your owner's compensation and net profit and how to build a dream studio to get you there. What we didn't cover in the article is what the expenses are that are keeping you from getting there. So that's what we're going to cover in our video today.
All right, welcome guys, and let's get started. So we are Jeff and Lori Poole from Indigo Silver and the Shoot Space located in Wilmington, North Carolina. Indigo Silver is our wedding and portrait brand. You can find us on social media at Indigo Silver and Indigo Silver One. And then the Shoot Space is our photography educational resource. We do mentoring and a few other things there. So definitely check us out at theshootspace.com and at the Shoot Space on social media.
All right, so one thing we talked about in the article is that if you're a home-based studio, you should be aiming for a 45% owner's compensation and net profit. If you're a retail-based studio, you should be aiming for 35% owner's compensation net profit. Basically, the difference we talked about is that while home studios keep more of what they make, so they have a bigger slice of the pie, a retail studio is actually operating on a bigger pie. So they take home more sales total. So in the end, it can be, you can actually make more money retail or home just depending on how you operate.
So let's talk about managing your expenses a little bit. A lot of people are scared of the word managerial accounting, and so we want to go over that a little bit and talk about what exactly managerial accounting is. So defined, managerial accounting is the process of identifying, measuring, analyzing, interpreting, and communicating information for the pursuit of an organization's goals. So basically it is accounting with a purpose. So things that we want to be tracking in our accounting are things like cost of sale, overhead, and owner's compensation and net profit. Now these are broken down into even further subcategories that we're going to go over next. But the main thing is looking at your finances with more of a critical eye rather than just money in, money out.
All right, so when you're looking at your expenses, you want to separate your expenses into two main categories, as Jeff mentioned. The first is cost of sale, the second is overhead, and then of course what's left over is your owner's compensation net profit. So cost of sale specifically, this involves something that we're already pretty familiar with called cost of goods. Cost of goods is essentially the money that you are spending on things like your lab costs, your album, your frames, basically the cost of the thing that you are turning around and selling to your client. That's your cost of goods. But cost of sale is actually more than just cost of goods. There are other costs involved beyond just that item that you're purchasing. So maybe you package up all of your prints in a pretty little bag with tissue paper and a ribbon. That costs you money. You might need to travel to the shoot or drive across town, or you may need to eat while you're on the job. Those are also costing you money in order to be able to deliver something to your client. Cost of sale also includes something called production labor. Production labor is essentially an independent contractor or somebody that you hire just to help you out with that job. So this can be somebody like a second shooter, for example, or perhaps you hire somebody to do your retouching. It's basically somebody that you hire on a per job basis where the cost of their labor is directly tied to the sale.
And that cost, that production labor isn't necessarily always an employee. It could be yourself. If you're doing your own editing and your own retouching, that time that you spend is also related to it. So basically, it's anything that you do that is dependent on the sale of a product. So, or working with the client. Now, on the other hand, overhead is just the opposite. Overhead, we're looking at things that, regardless of whether you have a shoot that month or not, these expenses are going to come due. So things such as rent and utilities. And even those of you who are home-based, you should still have rent to be paying to yourself from your business. So for example, let's use easy numbers. If your house is 1,000 square feet and your office and the space that you use for it is 100 square feet, that is 10% of your expenses that can be written off as business expenses. So now you can write off 10% of your mortgage payment. You can write off 10% of your utilities. You can write off 10% of your phone bill. So that is still part of your rent and utilities. It's going to come due every month, and that goes into that overhead category. Things like office supplies. We all need printer paper, pens, notepads, things of that nature. So we always need those as well. My downside, I have gear acquisition syndrome. So I always want new gear. Gear and any equipment that you buy is going to be part of your overhead also. Any hourly employees and any marketing expenses are also going to fall underneath the category of overhead because those are going to need to be paid regardless of whether you have a client walk through your door or not.
So it's important to understand that difference between the hourly employee and the production labor. An hourly employee, as Jeff mentioned, is somebody that you're paying regardless of whether or not you have a shoot. So if you have just a general office assistant that answers phone calls and emails for you, they need to get paid no matter what. Whereas if you have a second shooter, you really only need a second shooter if you're actually shooting a wedding. Therefore, you wouldn't have that cost if it weren't for the sale itself. Now, once you have been able to divvy up your expenses into cost of sale and overhead, that should really total all of the expenses that you have in your business. And what's left over after that is what's called your owner's compensation and net profit. Now, in the article, we simplified this a little bit and we just referred to it as net profit. But really, net profit is all the money that's left over. Let's say after all of your expenses, you have $50,000 left over. Out of that $50,000, you can choose to pay yourself as much or as little as you want. Maybe you only choose to pay yourself $40,000 in owner's compensation. That remaining $10,000 is still net profit, but perhaps you choose to leave it in the bank, you use it to pay down debt, or you use it to reinvest in your business. Maybe you're saving up to buy your own studio building. So there's other things that you can do with that money besides pay yourself, but it's important to note that all of that money that's left over is still essentially your net profit.
So now how do we, in calculating these percentages, what happens if our numbers are off? Because as you remember, for a home-based studio, your cost of sales should be around 25%, leaving your overhead at 35% and your owner's compensation at 45%. Well, most likely, most photographers are probably off on these numbers by just a little bit. I know when Lori and I first started out, ours were way off, which you're going to see in just a few minutes.
We're off by a lot of it.
By a lot. Like this pie didn't even look the same. So we're going to show you like a few things that we did to really help bring this pie back into order and get these numbers a little bit closer. And some common trouble spots that Lori and I had to address was the main thing is our cost of goods were too high relative to our gross sales. So we need to be looking at how much we're spending on our products versus how much we're making at the end of the year, and that number needs to be around 25%. So we've got to look at that, those trouble spots. Another thing is overhead being too high relative to gross sales. And finally, owner's compensation net profit is going to suffer as a result of those trouble spots.
So if you can imagine looking at this pie on the right, if the cost of sales slice gets bigger or the overhead slice gets bigger, then owner's compensation net profit has to get smaller. So the only thing that you can do is to fix those slices. Basically, you can increase your gross sales, which is going to give you a bigger pie and help reallocate how big those slices are, or you can decrease your expenses, basically making those cost of sale and overhead slices smaller. Sounds simple enough, right? Well, next month we're actually going to start addressing some strategies on how to actually decrease your expenses so that you can get your expenses in line and keep more of what you make while you grow your business.
So here's a true story over time. When Lori and I partnered in 2010 to create indigosilver, really neither one of us knew a whole lot about running a business. We were really good with the camera and we created really amazing images and we were making a lot of money. We ran our numbers and figured out, holy crap, we actually are not making a lot of money for us. And so if you look at this, our cost of sale was almost 40% and our overhead was 67%. Well, if I'm not a math genius, but I can tell you that there's nothing left at the end of the day for us to pay and live on our own and support our family. So at this point, we were actually living in the basement of our studio and couldn't afford to really move out because we went in debt 6% of what we were making. And granted, keep in mind we were making well over $100,000 a year in gross sales. So it wasn't that clients weren't calling and money wasn't coming in the door. We just did not know how to manage our cost of sale and our overhead. And so we were drowning in money going out the door. Even though there was a lot of money coming in the door, there was still more money coming out the door. Look at our numbers for the end of last year. We really tightened down our buckle. We watch what we spend. We are very cautious at anything that we buy. We watch our numbers like a hawk. And for that reason, you can see now that we've got our cost of sale down to 18%. Our overhead is down to 32%. That's less than half. And now we are bringing home almost 50% of every dollar that comes in the door to our studio. So just by watching what you're spending and how you're managing those expenses can make an enormous difference in how your business is profitable at the end of the year and how you live with your family. So we're going to talk more about this in coming issues, but just take a look at this and just see over these 7 years we've come a long ways, and even within the first 3 years, if you look at like 2013, 2014, we were already back in line. And then it became kind of addicting. And we just started really digging into those numbers more and more and more. And I think we've about got it as lean as we can get it. But we're always going to still try to hit that 50% or above mark.
It's a
So
challenge.
it becomes
Now,
a challenge.
what we recommend take home messages from this video is what we really want you guys to start doing is get set up with managerial accounting. Get set up so that you can track all the money coming into your studio and all the money that's leaving the studio, and learn to separate those expenses as either cost of sale or overhead, so that you can start looking at where you need to trim your costs, where you can spend a little bit more. We are, like we said, we're going to dig into this a little bit more in future articles, but this is going to give you a head start if you go ahead and start on this now.
So guys, thank you for reading our article and tuning into our video. Again, here's our contact information, and we look forward to seeing you down the road. And we'll give you just a really quick goodbye as we're signing off for today, but definitely feel free to reach out to us with questions. Check us out on social media, and we look forward to seeing you in future articles. Thanks, guys.
See ya.